This is the first sight we have of the prison. Oh, couldn't come sooner. I am freaking out on these roads. And even to this day, because this region is so rich in minerals, you've got modern day mining operations just up the road. Again, that's literally right here. So this actually looks to be the headquarters. And you can see, I'll explore the building to the left in just a minute, but this looks to be some kind of a fortified position. Just in case they had any ideas of perhaps an uprising of some kind. This is all so well preserved, I'm surprised. So I guess that building that we last went to was where they would bring relatives if you were given permission to visit. And I guess that happened because if you got a sentence here, it was basically a life sentence. And in a lot of cases, these folks lived or were imprisoned just down the road from where they grew up. So this is where the families would meet and be vetted by the headquarters staff. And this sign is now faded, but it says that if you were to meet your relatives, if they granted permission, that meeting would happen right in here. It lasted 15 minutes. You'd be watched by a guard, and there were iron bars. So it was just barely enough, sometimes not even enough, to touch fingertips with family. And in spite of it all, this is an amazingly beautiful place. And as this sign says, the mouth of the valley is pretty far down here, and there would have been a large gateway between the headquarters and where the prison inmates would live. These signs do a pretty good job of explaining who was where. I was talking to someone the other day who lost many family members to these prisons, whose family spent decades here. And they said that during the Cold War, Hoxha met with Joseph Stalin, and Stalin said you have to figure out what to do about the religious population, especially the Catholics, because they're very well known to be, he called them social fascists, clerical fascists, and Hoxha said, oh, don't worry, we've imprisoned them all already. And even Joseph Stalin said, how did you manage that? You need to make some kind of a law, and then under some pretext, after a grace period, put them in prison. And Hoxha said, oh, well, I'll get around to doing that. So these prisons were modeled after the Stalinist gulags, and at no point did Hoxha ever sort of revise his dictatorship. This happened all across the behind the Iron Curtain, that people would revise and be a little bit less brutal, but Hoxha doubled down. And I believe he was at a meeting in the 1980s or 70s in Moscow, and he was asked by one of the officials there, what is your biggest regret about Joseph Stalin? And he looked the guy in the face and he said, not killing you. So absolutely brutal man. And the sign on this building is so faded I can't make out what it says, but these rooms are probably too big to be living quarters. Maybe this was a hospital, although I can't see a hospital being that large in a gulag like this. I'll just do a little walkthrough. These floors are making me a bit nervous. Oh, wow. So this art piece was created in 2023 and debuted 2024. It's 49 surviving people who are imprisoned here, and their stories were all captured on audio. They document the life from the early 1960s to 1991. This prison operated all the way up until 1991. And you can see a truck going to the still active mine. So this is the dining facility, the mess hall. It says there on the sign that they got 3 meals a day. Now that's something that a lot of communist regimes would do. They would calculate everything as if it was a science. The same thing with the Nazis who mechanized their mass killing. If you could bring it down to a science, then it took a lot of the moral weight off of what was going on here. And specifically 3 meals a day, they calculated the calorie content based off of normal living conditions, not in the conditions being packed into a 10 times overcrowded prison performing much too much labor. They were just calculating it based off of local farmers. I've actually heard as well from locals who had family in the Tepelena concentration camp that they would also do strange medical experiments that remind me more of Unit 731 than they do Mengele. It included putting boiled eggs and garlic cloves in their armpit. They would cut into the armpit and put them in there, sew it up, and just let it rot. So some of the most depraved acts known to humanity would have been committed in a place like this. It's chilling, really, to be here. So all the inmates of the camp would be forced to line up in this square and be counted before going to the dining hall. I wonder if any of these doors are open. So this is a really fascinating sign. It says that in 1973 there was a revolt here. Now the Albanian flag nowadays is the two-headed eagle on a red field, but the communist flag just put a red star over it. So during this revolt, they seized the building, and 2 men, Choku and Seti, raised the flag without the red star over this facility. And heading down now into the building itself, you can see there was propaganda on the walls here. This sign is describing something that I've heard described in Sobibor and many concentration camp stories. The roll call was conducted right here on this concrete platform, and the guards, especially when it was cold or raining, they would often prolong this roll call just because they were feeling extra sadistic that day. And these are the barracks where 54 inmates would sleep per room. Now, I keep comparing sometimes this to the Nazis, but I spoke to somebody whose father was actually in prison for 20 years, and they said that what made this different from the Nazis, not really comparable, is just the fact that these were your fellow countrymen. Oftentimes, the Nazis would come in and you would be Polish, and that was an occupation, but this was seen as something. The guards were your neighbors. They went to high school with you. They used to be your friends. And now they're kicking you and making you wait in the snow and wind while they're doing a roll call. And right above the door is a quote from Enver Hoxha. They said the last few years of the regime, Hoxha's friends and family would often take that money and put it into Swiss bank accounts. They're still very influential in Albanian politics today, although they've decided to take a much more social democrat approach. Pretty much as soon as Hoxha died, they claimed to be moderate reformers. And you can see here someone even signed their name back in 1997. That tells me not a whole lot of people visit this. It's a memory that I feel a lot of people would want to forget, but very intense just walking through here. And here is something signed by someone who formerly was a prisoner, Yusuf Hoxha. And from a former prisoner here, Yusuf Hoxha, who was imprisoned for a decade from 75 to 85. You can see also some prison artwork. This probably would have been from the very last days of this gulag, because naturally, if you drew on the white walls, you could expect a punishment. I would imagine that a large part about being imprisoned for so long, you miss the creature comforts, especially towards the 70s and 80s, maybe crowding around a TV and watching some soccer. And a cross carved into the wall from Dua Janai. And here is Mizan Abazi, imprisoned from 77 until the closure in 91. Another cross. And if the camera will focus, a jet fighter, someone like the band The Scorpions. Gillette and Fujifilm. And now let's take a look at the administration's headquarters. You can see over there where families would be vetted. And inside this room, it looks to me like somebody took a rifle to this wall. I can't imagine a more cathartic way of expressing your anger after years in prison. Pretty soon, I'm going to go check this building out over here. The prisoners are actually behind us, so I wonder if this was housing for the guards. As you can see, I'm going to have to give my rental car a thorough washing, but I decided to drive down here and see what these two buildings are. Housing buildings for the free laborers of the mine. So I guess they also had paid laborers. It must have been very strange to work alongside slaves. It looks like now this building is serving an agricultural purpose. So this is the housing for the free workers. And there are small buildings all across this valley that I'm sure I would never have time to explore. But these two housing complexes for the free laborers, although how free can you be in Albania during the Hoxha regime? Very interesting. I'm just gonna walk through here a little bit. There's quite a few pickers that are digging into my ankles. Try not to fall. It looks like sheep are allowed to graze here. And the housing for the employed miners, the headquarters behind which the prison barracks were. But I'm seeing a sign up here that says Enver Hoxha. This monument, sorry, is from 2007. And let's come see the portrait of the dictator Enver Hoxha was placed right there. So even the employed miners would have to look at it as soon as they got back from work and heading to. And this is one of the many mine shafts that dot this valley. It might look easy to get to on Google Earth, but this is 7-8 kilometers of muddy roads that often get very close to the edge, enough to make me pretty unnerved.